The Out of Bounds Show is brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance. Bundle your car and home and save with your local Farm Bureau Insurance agent. We welcome in Steve Robertson, 247 Sports, Gene's Page, Boneyard Podcast. He joins us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. Big weekend for Jeff Levy. Hadn't even had his staff together for more than about 24 to 48 hours. And yet they made some noise. So let's get right into it. Steve, what was your reaction to the Blake Shapen out of Baylor, transfer portal QB? He's got PT under his belt. I think it's a huge pickup for Jeff Levy. What was your reaction?
Well, I like him too. I was somewhat surprised, to be honest with you. You know, he was a guy that hadn't even tweeted in 2 years, so he was a guy kind of flying under the radar a little bit, and got him on the phone shortly after Pete Thamel broke the news. And this young man's very, very excited. A huge fan of Jeff Levy and thinks that he can come in and do some big things. Missed 4 games this year due to injury, and Baylor certainly needed him. It was a mess down there, but it's ironic that Sawyer Robertson's the guy that ended up being a starter there for a while, and now Blake Shapen's coming here. But, yeah, I think it's good. I think it's one of those situations, too. I don't consider it done, though. I think they'll still fish in the portal and provide some competition at the position if they can find a guy. They're not going to sign a guy just to sign a guy, but I do think there's some big names out there that certainly you would take. I don't think you consider it over and done with. I mean, you're not going to turn down great players, and I know State's still active in the portal at several positions, but if a difference maker is available at quarterback and has some interest, then I think that you bring in 2 guys along with a high school guy that State picked up yesterday.
Yeah, we'll talk about Van Buren here in just a second, but who else do you think Levy and the offensive staff could be hunting transfer portal QB-wise, Steve?
It's interesting. I got a tip Thursday that Kyle McCord from Ohio State was going to visit. And my policy on these official visits is I try to confirm it with the player, either directly through an interview or, of course, through social media when they, tweet out their graphic they're visiting and things of that nature. But, I just wasn't able to get him on the phone. And I certainly didn't want to, put a cloud over the weekend. Hey, Kyle McCord's coming, and then he cancels. Well, that's exactly what ends up happening. And so a lot of people think he's headed to Nebraska, and he may be. But, there's some other guys, DJ, of course, still out there. The State's been linked some to Cameron Ward, but I think that's an uphill battle. I think he's going to end up staying out west somewhere. But there's also going to be some more names go in the talent pool here soon, too. I've been told of a couple of guys out there that are just kind of watching and observing. And, the Dylan Gabriel thing was pretty wild. The very first day he goes in the portal, it was pretty split. People said, hey, it's going to be Oregon or it's going to be Mississippi State because of his relationship with Levy. But ultimately, Phil Knight and Oregon won out over the weekend. He was expected to visit Mississippi State today, and I understand that's all been canceled. He'll just go ahead and transfer to Oregon and consider his recruitment done. But, it's one of those things where I think you cannot ill afford to just sit back and say, okay, I think we're done here, because there could be some other big names go in the portal, and we fully expect that to be the case. I saw a graphic yesterday. It's pretty crazy. There's 130 FBS programs in the country, and there's already 105 quarterbacks in the portal. And everybody, of course, wants to be the starter somewhere. Well,
right.
Somebody is going to be happy to get an opportunity and get their school and books paid for. But, they're still on some guys, and it's something that we continue to monitor. And I can promise you after this, stretch of, a coaching search and coaching hires and things like that, now the first big official visit weekend is here. There is one guy in Mississippi that is extremely excited about National Signing Day, and that is me.
Steve Robertson on the Out of Bounds Show. Okay, brought to you by Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor and Ridgeland, Starkville, and Tupelo. What about how would you describe the weekend for Levy and crew, considering he didn't even put together the staff until Thursday?
Well, I think it's an absolutely best case scenario, and I think it maybe says a lot too about their ability to go get guys that fit their system and do it rather quickly. Of course, most of these guys that committed are people that had relationships with Mississippi State and or Jeff Levy prior to the weekend. But, Bulldog fans are pumped, as they should be. That's one of those things. Everybody expected this class to just kind of be a dud in many respects. And I think Jeff Levy and him have said, we don't prescribe to that. We're not subscribing to that line of thinking. And so big weekend in many respects. And I think there's some big things left to go with this class. And this next weekend, will be big. We've confirmed, I think, 7 visitors already for the weekend, but it's going to be very defensive heavy. You had a lot of offensive guys on campus this week and sprinkled in with a few defensive guys. And then next week it's going to be kind of the opposite. But, State's got to get going, especially on defensive back and defensive line recruiting. And this weekend is going to be a central part of that.
So big transfer portal and JUCO is what you're thinking?
Yeah, I think so. Matter of fact, I'm waiting to hear back from Keaton Thomas right now. He's a guy that you ever wanted to design a linebacker as a creative player, it'd be that kid out of Northeast Mississippi Community College. He's a native of Jacksonville, Florida. He committed to Baylor over the weekend. He picked up an offer from Matt Barnes late last week. In fact, he told me that Matt Barnes told him that was the first phone call he made to a recruit. And then he goes this weekend and commits to Baylor. And certainly State has some needs at linebacker. And so I'm still waiting to hear back from him this morning to see if he plans to follow through with the visit. I'm not optimistic, but, people do surprise you. And then East Mississippi Community College leading tackler Marcus Ross expected to be here later this week, too. Very ultra-productive guy. And, of course, Scuba Tech playing for the National Championship on Wednesday. And so, a week later, those guys will be signing their national letters of intent. Transfer portal guys don't. That's one thing we can't reiterate enough. There are a lot of people that think, we got to have all these transfers committed by Wednesday. Transfer portal prospects do not sign a national letter of intent. Now, I can argue I think they should. I think it protects them and kind of keeps them from craziness in the end. But they have all the way up to the drop ad date to enroll because they don't really sign anything. They can sign a scholarship agreement or whatever, but that's not binding. But until they enroll, they're still recruitable athletes. So anybody thinking, oh, my gosh, we got to get 20 commitments between now and Wednesday, that's just not true. You basically have about a month to figure out this transfer portal thing.
Steve Robertson, genespage.com. How wild was your board over the weekend or the last 2 or 3 days?
Well, it's incredible, but that's really been the case for a while now. I mean, we stay pretty busy, but over the course of the last, 8 weeks, it's been difficult to keep up. I mean, it's a real chore. And then, we're churning out more content than ever. We're doing 10+ stories a day, every single day. And I joke about that sometimes with our guys. I say, I remember, when I was a kid, there'd be some days the Clarion Ledger wouldn't have a story, and how far we've come as media, not just Mississippi State, but just our industry as a whole. And, the expectation now is that, content is king. A lot of people want to say, well, we got a great message board. That's cool. That's cool. It doesn't make any money, but that's really cool. So you've got to get out there and pump out content. And we've got a great team, but I'll tell you, it's amazing the demands that are on the media today. And, a lot of people say, well, back when so-and-so and so-and-so in the good old days, and these are the good old days, not those days. And those guys didn't have the internet to do research. They didn't have the ability to post content immediately. And they usually wrote one column a day, and you and I both know some people that existed in that era, and they'll tell you this is a much easier way to do it. But the issue with that is that the demand for information is just absolutely non-ending. And so, hey, I think we wrote 13, 14 stories yesterday. Our people would have read 30 if we had an opportunity to write them. I mean, that's just the access to information for sports fans today is absolutely unbelievable. And it's difficult for us sometimes to keep up with demand.
Sure. Steve Robertson on the show, brought to you by Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor and Ridgeland. Mario Craver, wide receiver, committed to Jeff Levy and the crew over the weekend. What does he bring to the table, Steve?
I absolutely love this kid. And, of course, won a state championship Friday night for Clay Chalkville from Alabama, the 6A state championship. He's a lot, closer to, the Tulu Griffins of the world, similar body type. People say, well, maybe faster than Tulu. And it's funny, it's always the new guy that's faster, right? It's never the old guy. Yeah, some people say that. But, he's a slot guy all the way, but he's a matchup nightmare. And you get him paired up with a safety, that's a win for you every time. Really like him. And I'll tell you that image that they tweeted out with Jeff Levy, and then you've got, J.J. Harrell and Stonka Burnside and Mario Craver and Daniel Hill and all those guys all stacked up. Michael Van Buren was a part of that. Pretty tough image. And, people are like, now, hey, we're going to go 6 for 6. And I'd love for that to be the case. I don't know that we can call that just yet. I think Daniel Hill still got some thinking to do. And, of course, he'll announce at a national all-star game on January 6th and Burnside on the 2nd. But could be a situation where State gets some national press. There's only been a couple of guys in the history of these all-star games as announced from Mississippi State publicly. And you get a lot of juice because the nation is watching. And so that could be a situation where if State could get all 6 and have Stonka Burnside announced on January 3rd, I guess, and then Daniel Hill on the 6th on 2 national platforms, that could create a lot of juice for Jeff Lebby and his crew.
How do they feel about Daniel Hill? Strong talk that he is hunting a Bama offer. How do you see this playing out?
That's a great question. And, much of this process, I've been told, Steve, it's not even worth your time to interview him. He's not going to go to Mississippi State. And, he releases his top 6 and State makes a list. And people are like, oh, that's just kind of a courtesy mention because he's a State fan. But he's going to end up going out of state. Now, all of a sudden, you've had a coaching change, a philosophical change. Now, all of a sudden, there's some renewed interest in Mississippi State. So I think State's very much in the game there, whereas a month ago, I wouldn't have said that. I would have told you point blank that, hey, Daniel Hill is probably going to end up at Alabama or Tennessee, and I still think he'll end up at Alabama if they're willing to take him. But the thing that I hear about him is he really wants the football in his hands. And a lot of people think that he's a linebacker. I think he's talented enough to be either one at a high level in the Southeastern Conference. But Mississippi State needs a running back. And, Conan Daniels, we fully expect him out of West Point to stick with Florida. And then there's Daniel Hill, a big, bruising, physical running back. I think it makes good sense and will be a good fit. Will he pull the trigger? That remains to be seen. But you start adding guys like Michael Van Buren and Stonka Burnside back to the class, and then Daniel Hill and Mario Craver. Those guys all have 4 stars next to their name, and you might could take a run at maybe get a top 25 class when it's all said and done.
What is your confidence level with Stonka Burnside out of Starkville?
I'd say about 9.1, maybe 9.2. I think in the end he sticks with Mississippi State. He and J.J. Harrell are as close as any 2 recruits I've ever seen. And I just don't think there's a situation where they don't play together. I think Stonka's a guy, too, that got really frustrated. It's like you commit to this school and you love Chad Bumpus, and then you see the product on the field and you're like, man, wide receivers are just out there basically as a decoy or a perimeter blocker, and that's not the scheme I want to play in. And now you bring in Jeff Lebby, who's going to air it out and chunk it down the field and things like that. It's a much more wide receiver-friendly offense. Not to say that Ole Miss isn't. It certainly is. But I think because of his connections and relationships, I think State's going to be really difficult to beat.
Okay. We love talking skill people. Let's hit Van Buren real quick, but then let's get into some line of scrimmage because that's where you win. I know on your board and other boards, the skill guys and the quarterbacks, drive the train. When were you? How confident were you on this Van Buren thing going into the weekend?
Well, I was told there was a good chance that he may commit and announce later. One of the things that we found out yesterday is that ESPN was trying to get him to wait and announce for them on National Signing Day. And that's a difficult opportunity to turn down, right? I mean, with the nation watching. But Van Buren and his dad felt like that Mississippi State was better served by him committing now, helping lure some of these wide receivers and allowing Jeff Lebby to get a big win early and get that out there publicly. And I agree with that. I think that line of thinking is big, especially when you've already got some other guys you're expecting to get that may announce these all-star games. But I was told on yesterday morning, he is going to commit to Mississippi State. Don't know when he will announce, but he's going to be a Bulldog. And matter of fact, one of our contacts within the network spoke to his coach who was walking into the Baltimore Ravens game. He goes, "Oh yeah, you can go and get your story. He's going to be a Bulldog. Mike's going to announce today." So we did, and I was able to speak to him yesterday at the airport, and I can tell you that he is extremely excited, not just about the offense and a chance to play in the Southeastern Conference, but just being around these guys this weekend. He really feels like it's a good group of guys that can do some special things, and he's excited to be a part of that. And he says that he's going to do all he can down the stretch to help Mississippi State close out this class as strongly as possible. And that's what you expect from your quarterback. You expect him to be a leader in every aspect. And I think it says a lot about the young man and his family to say, you know what, hey, we could wait and have this big national moment on ESPN, and that's about us. Or we can do what we think is best for Mississippi State and let Mike serve as a drawing card for the recruits. And that's what they did, and I think that says a lot about him as a person.
Okay, Steve Robertson, genespage.com on the Out of Bounds Show, brought to you by Bulldog Burger in Ridgeland. J.J. Harrell, you mentioned him. Somebody texted us just a minute ago. Is he kind of the So people were talking last week. Obviously, it was other schools that this class may not even finish in the top 50. Right now on 247 Sports, who you're affiliated with, they're 37th. If they land Stonk and a couple other players, they will be in the top 30. How much credit do you give a kid like J.J. Harold that's hung in there for MSU and kind of seems like the rally guy around the class?
Well, I think the fact that when he came out publicly after the coaching change and said, hey, as long as Coach Bump is there, I'm good. He never wavered. And of course, he was absolutely inundated with other people trying to get him to flip. And, he goes, hey, Mississippi State's where I want to go. I'm going to wait and see this thing out. As long as they keep Coach Bump, I'm going to be in good position. And one thing that I'll say, too, there's a lot of people that talk to hear themselves talk. And they're like, oh, well, this recruiting class is not going to finish in the top 50. Okay, well, you got to know Mississippi State's going to add some players, right? I mean, so mathematically, yeah. I mean, you already were right there at 50 anyway, even with the decommitments, and it's just, some people just like to talk. And did I expect Mike Van Buren? No, I absolutely did not. Not when all this first broke down, I said, they'll probably have to take a developmental guy. And Jeff Lovey's like, nah, I'm going to go get this 4-star quarterback from Baltimore, Maryland, and he did it. And I think a big part of that, J.J. Harrell is a guy that has kind of been the linchpin in this class. And I can tell you, he has been on the phone and texting with several of the other commitments when all the coaching change happened. He goes, hey, let's just all hang in here together. Let's see what happens. Nobody has to make any rash decisions right now. So he has been the leader and really the bell cow in this class. And even though Stonka Burnside decommitted, and there were so many people, they weren't sourced with anything. It's just there's just people that are self-loathing Mississippi State people. Well, J.J. Harrell will be next, and that just wasn't the case. J.J. from the outset has been true Maroon, and a lot of people said, you know what, he may have to turn down a lot of money to go to Mississippi State. And I think in this respect too, I think he's fine. I think he will be, and I think the fact that now that he's got his quarterback, I think now he kind of sees the fruit of his own labor. So he's like, yeah, I made the right decision. This is working out well for me and for Mississippi State. So let's go finish the deal.
Steve Robertson, genespage.com, the Boneyard podcast, talking Levy recruiting. He's doing this on the fly, just put his staff together, and they had a big weekend considering. Let's go to line of scrimmage. What's realistic going? There's not a lot of Power 5 linemen out there, offensive especially. Even if you get one, or G5, a guy who's developed and played for several years. What's going on with the North Texas guy? What else are you seeing? What is realistic for Kennedy and Levy the next week or so as far as line of scrimmage, Steve?
Well, on the offensive line, you have 3 guys committed, and you feel good about all 3 of those guys. Of course, Timothy Lewis, T.J. Lockhart, an All-State guy. Luke Work is an All-American. And so those are good. But those guys don't get you better next year, right? So I think you got to go out and probably get 3 portal linemen, or at least 3 older linemen. I would prefer portal to JUCO when it comes to offensive linemen, just because of the fact that the physical demands, there's a learning curve with all that stuff. But I think it could be a situation where, Ethan Minor's a guy that visited this weekend. He is tentatively scheduled to visit Arkansas this week, which is kind of interesting since Cody Kennedy just came from up there. But I think when it's all said and done, you'll probably have a half and half class. You'll have some young high school guys will have opportunity to develop and grow, but you've got to get some guys. I mean, you feel like, Percy Lewis and some other guys coming back, you've got some pieces to work with, but you don't have enough. And State's going to have to supplement that, I think, through the portal on the offensive line side. Now, the defensive line side, of course, Tyler Carter, decommits last night, and that's kind of a Dr. Evil quote situation there. We certainly wish that young man the best, but David Turner is going to have to be huge for State down the stretch. Going to have to be huge. I mean, you got a couple of guys committed right now, one from the high school ranks, Terrence Sibler, and of course Ashawn Shepard from East Mississippi. And I can tell you that the football opinion of Ashawn Shepard, and talking to JUCO coaches around the state and people like that, is much higher than the casual fan. There are a lot of people that think that he's going to be a very important piece for Mississippi State. He just, Buddy Stevens thinks he's going to be a Sunday guy, and so you've got him, and it's funny too. All of a sudden, he's filled in offers late from everybody else, But that's not enough, right? You're going to have to go out and get some other guys, and you hope with Calvin Dinkins coming back healthy and Trevion Williams next year, you feel like you've got some building blocks. But those guys don't have a ton of experience, and so you need to go get some stopgap guys that make you better as a football team next year. We expect DeMonte Russell will be back next year.
That'd be huge.
And so you've got some pieces, but you need more.
Trevion coming back.
Absolutely. But when you look at like David Turner, got Deontay Anderson too. That's a guy too that really flashed some for him this year. But I would put David Turner down the stretch up against just about anybody. I mean, if it boiled down to, hey, who can coach me and develop me, David's going to win that battle. Of course, things are a lot more complicated these days for NIL recruiting and things of that nature. But David Turner's got to be a star for state down the stretch. And this weekend, I think you've got to see some D-block guys come in. I mean, Chris McClellan's a guy out of Florida. I visited Colorado over the weekend. David Turner recruited him to Florida, and then, Suleiman Popka. I talked to him over the weekend. He is the guy that's at Purdue right now. David Turner recruited him when he was at Texas San Antonio. And so there are some guys out there in the portal that have relationships with David Turner, and David's going to need to come through on some of those. And I would never ever bet against David Turner in a situation like that because of his pedigree. And, it's been a difficult year. And, Dave, of course, added to the staff late, and many of these defensive linemen in the state made their decisions in the spring, and so there's so many people that think, well, why aren't we on these guys? Well, you've had other schools recruit them for 2 years, and so.
Oh, well, look, I mean, hey, give Ole Miss credit. Lane's going on year 5. He's been there 4 years. They didn't go through 4 head coaches in less than 12 months, right? I mean, it is what it is. Kudos to them for taking advantage.
Well, you look at Derek Nix, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Derek Nix is institution in the state, right? I mean, Derek Nix knows. Derek Nix, if he probably has a hall pass sticker from every high school in the state, right, in his trunk, just rolling around back there. But when you've got people that have been here that have an infrastructure and they have relationships and there is continuity, that's what happens. And we had this discussion here a few weeks back when I wrote the column about player retention. Mississippi State and Auburn next to Tennessee had the worst player retention in the SEC. Well, what do those two have in common? They both made 2 coaching changes in the NCAA transfer portal era, and now Mississippi State has made a 3rd one. And so you're going to have roster attrition. You're going to have guys that leave because they don't have a relationship with your staff. And that's the big hope for Jeff Lebby and this group is they come in here and they can replicate that and have, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 good years. And I think Mississippi State's going to have to be willing to pay Jeff Lebby and get his group to stay. But that's like someone's responsibility, not mine or yours.
All right. Steve Robertson, genespage.com. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it. Yeah. He joined us on the Farm Bureau Insurance guest line. We are the Out of Bounds Show. We're driven by your next Ford F-150. Mack Hike Ford, I-55 North in Jackson. Best selection of pre-owned and new Ford F-150s. Right there, you can see it from the interstate. Mack Hike Ford. That's where your next Ford F-150 is, pre-owned or new. The show is also brought to you by lunch today. Bulldog Burger, Lake Harbor in Ridgeland. Bulldog Burger, right down from the Armory. Lunch today, brought to you by Bulldog Burger. Tom Luganville, 9:30 on recruiting.